People, let's go. Block Party's out. I'm your host, Mike Wahle. Thanks for watching. If you're enjoying, please subscribe, rate, and review on our YouTube channel, Process to Perform. You can hit me up at Mike Wahle68 on X or Twitter. Or you can hit me on Process to Perform on Instagram. I'm sure there's a TikTok somewhere, but I don't really use it. Show is sponsored, as always, by Bet Online. Bet Online is your number one source for all your summer sports needs, from Major League Baseball, golf, the NBA, and NHL playoffs as well. All the latest stats, news, and scores available to follow your favorite teams. Get the latest odds and lines, including the latest team matchups, player props, and odds on just about every sport out there. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to get in on the action. Bet Online, where the game starts. And again, we're in this kind of doldrums of the NFL. I know that I think the Packers are doing some OTAs, and there's some teams are doing some OTAs right now. It's interesting, actually, if you look at it from my side, where I'm working with some players, the difference in intensity, the difference in volume with some of the different OTA practices as far as what they're doing, how many team practice reps they have, et cetera. It is kind of interesting. It's certainly more than we ever used to do. And that's going to be our topic today, because the NFLPA has now come out and said we want to fundamentally change how we structure the offseason. I'm going to read a quote from NFL.com, because this stuff is actually – there's a couple levels to this that I think are interesting. They've been talking about it for about 2 decades now, but they're actually going to move on it after years and years and years of kind of going the other way. So here's the quote. NFLPA is working to finalize a proposal to overhaul the offseason starting as soon as 2025, eliminating voluntary on-field work in spring in favor of a longer training camp ramp-up, with players reporting in mid-June to early July. NFL insider Tom Pelissero reported Tuesday, per sources informed of the plan. Keywords there: eliminating voluntary on-field work. Okay, so why is that important? In the offseason, your head coach is going to say, hey, offseason program starts April 1 and it goes until June 17, let's say. And here are our OTAs, here's our mini camps, here's the voluntary, here's the stuff we want you have to be at. If you're not there, depending on the program, if you're not there, because the coaches have hours during the day they can classroom, they can work with you on the field. So if you're not there, like, the coaches don't care if you're working out somewhere else. Everybody prefer you to see what you're doing. It's always nice to be able to stick your head into the weight room and see if a guy's working out. But as far as being able to work with them, if they're not allowed to work with the players, then the head coach isn't going to really care if they're in Green Bay, if they're in South Florida, because in South Florida, they have the House of Athlete and a bunch of Bomberinos and all that, where you can work out with all of these different athletes from all over the country and really get, very, very high-end training that is specific to you. You might not be able to necessarily get that at the facility, only because if there's 100 guys in the weight room and there's 4 to 5 strength coaches plus interns, that's really tough to manage each individual player. Like, what do you need the most? So we've kind of gone through that before, but this is interesting because the only way to get rid of that pull, like, the players feel obligated to show up because it could affect their contract talks. For some of the players, it could affect whether or not they make the team. Like, I remember John Fox was very adamant that he didn't want players that weren't in the offseason program to be captains on his teams, which affected me, by the way. So a lot of this stuff, they need to write it in and, like, we're not going to be part of this at all. Otherwise, there'll still be that pressure coming in. They've been talking about this for decades. Why not have a longer offseason and then have a ramp-up period that is more suiting to the rigors of an NFL season? Like, in other words, why take 2 months off between June and the end of July, or a month and a half off, instead of using that as a ramp-up period to actually be ready for the season? Here's kind of the weird thing that's going on right now. Many of you undoubtedly are going to wonder why the NFLPA would bring up something like this to the negotiating table right now, knowing full well that Roger Goodell and his company want to extend the season by another game to the 18th season. Like, why would you put a negotiating chip on the table that this would not be a like-for-like deal? So if they said, okay, like, if you went to the owners today and said, hey, we'll give you an 18th game, but you got to give us back this offseason from April 1 to, let's say, June 20th, we don't want to be in the building anymore. They'd go, okay, deal. Because they don't care at all. Here's the problem. Let me explain the problem with an 18-game season. Even the 17-game season they have right now, plus an added playoff game. And I'm not talking about for the fans, because I'm sure the fans want all the content they can grab. And I understand that. But think about it from an athlete perspective, and think about it from a quality of play perspective, because I think at some level you got to start caring about that as well. There is a risk reward scale that you generally live by. Okay. And just like it, and I could liken it to how stupid this camera is that sometimes goes out. What's the risk for me to go buy another one that it works just as poorly as the last two? I don't know. But there's a risk reward scale you generally live by. Like, for example, if I want to go cliff diving, I want the reward of the exhilaration of going cliff diving. I don't want to risk that I belly flop and like get sick for the next 2 days. If I want to ride a bull, I'm also might be afraid of what happens when he starts bucking. So we do these things that are really exciting where we want to, but we don't know if the reward's worth the risk. Professional athletes at every level are always battling with that risk reward. And I think for, a lot of the guys, the reasons that they're successful, men and women, are because they can kind of tamper or lower the or change the profile of the risk reward in their mind, like maybe more so than the general population. Athletes are getting paid in part because they're willing to do stuff that other people aren't willing to do, like boxing Mike Tyson, or going up on a half pipe and trying to pull a 1080 on a skateboard. Most people aren't going to go, you know what, I'm going to train. I'm willing to put myself through the training for 4 to 6 months that it takes to do either one of those things. Oh, and then I actually got to go do it in front of 1 million people, especially like the boxing thing, 2-man enter, 1-man leave deal. You don't, that goes against the risk reward profile of the general population. And that's why, in part, we love to watch athletes, because they're willing to do things we're not willing to do, or they're able to do things we're not willing to do. Football players are now making more money than I think anyone ever thought they would. And I think that's a fantastic deal. But we've talked about it before, that the high-priced guys now are making maybe 5x of what they used to make, like 20 years ago, not that long ago. I'm talking about the highest paid guys in the league are making somewhere between 4 and 5 times what they used to make 20, 25 years ago. And with that extra income, because that's, you think about that versus like, a teacher's salary, a banker's salary, almost any other profession, the risk profile changes because that's gone up so much more than everything else. So the amount of money that would be generated and sent directly to every player's pocketbook if they added an 18th game is not going to justify the additional wear and tear, the additional risk of playing one extra game plus potentially an extra playoff game. For quarterbacks, that might be worth it because their risk profile is different. They don't get hit as much, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's not a violent, kickers, quarterbacks, it's not a violent part of the sport. But you start talking about anybody who's involved in actual confrontation, that risk reward profile doesn't make really any sense. And then you'll also hear about guys saying, and depending on who you are, where's that extra money go? Well, it goes to the top paid guys. It doesn't go to like league minimum is probably not going to change because they changed this one rule or add an 18th game. It might change a little bit, but that money is really going to go somewhere else. So for a lineman, running back, or a safety, it's the extra games don't add up to extra seasons. So you're running out of rope come the end of the regular season now as it is. Like by the 17th week, I guess it's week 18 now, if you're exhausted already, physically you're beat up, you're taped together at some part of your joints. And the idea of adding an extra game so you can make kind of a marginal amount more in your weekly check versus playing another couple extra seasons. Like it's not the cumulative effect that one game's going to have over 12 years. It's the cumulative effect that an 18th game would have over that season in particular. Now, it does have a cumulative effect over the course of your career, but you just like at, your start week one, training camp's the last day you feel nice, feel good about yourself, feel like physically. Week 1, you're okay. Week 5, you're hurt. Week 8, you're tired. Week 12, you feel like, dog crap. Week 17, you're hoping that you're in the playoffs. Otherwise, you're ready to be done. Now there's an 18th game. More people get hurt. So if you are potentially eliminating, or reducing the profile of my career, because guys now want to play longer guys now would rather play longer at 80% than having a shorter career at like 90, 95%. because the money's just so different now. Like the profile changes. So what do? Do you risk, reducing your career from like 12 years to 8 years so you can play one extra game? Doesn't make any sense for the players. It makes a lot of sense for the fans. Makes a lot of sense for the owners who have zero risk profile here. It makes no sense for the player. So just put it in perspective this way. If you're a veteran player who's a good player, you're probably making somewhere between non-quarterbacks, $10 to $25 million a year. What could possibly be important enough, or what amount of money would be enough to go, I'm going to add a game and potentially lose a season or 2 seasons or 3 seasons? Because the more games you play, the more games you have to get through, the greater the chance you getting injured. So why put this on the table now? And I think there's 3 reasons. Number one, and this is what you hope, hopefully the NFLPA is saying, listen, this is off the table as far as concessions for a 19th game. Now, the NFLPA has used time at the facility before as a bargaining chip for when they were revenue share. When they lost in revenue share, they're like, oh, we want our, we don't want our centers to have to touch a football for 2 months, or we don't have, we don't want to do X, Y, and Z. So that was like the DeMaurice Smith, that group, Jeff Saturday, that was that group that was negotiating time in the building for like potential revenue share issues. I think that the new NFLPA director, Lloyd Howell Jr., I think he's going to not make the same mistake that D. Smith made. I just repeatedly made, I should say. Like, I don't think that's it. So I think that's off the table, number one. Number two, this is being presented as a longer off season paired with a longer ramp-up period to the actual season. So from a training perspective, this could actually make way more sense. I'll quickly explain why. Right now, you get to the end of the offseason program. It's like June 17th. And then every player is in as good a shape as they're going to get as far as the team's concerned. They've been training for, 8 to 12 weeks, running 8 to 12 weeks, light field work for 8 to 12 weeks as far as like not in pads. So there's a level of physicality you can't reach. So most guys, like most coaches are probably going like, man, I really feel good about the way Mike looks on June 17th. Let's just hope that wherever he goes after this, and for the month and a half that he's gone, that he comes back in better shape, or at least as good shape as he's in right now. But a lot of guys, even still, aren't using that time in a manner that would be fortuitous for them to maximize their abilities come July, August, September, October, etc. So that gap period, a lot of guys get detrained because unless you're doing football stuff, it's hard to do football stuff. Like unless you're with the group, it's hard. So you can get in great shape, you can get stronger, you can get faster. But as far as like being able to go out, maybe work on some of your technique, or doing some team stuff, as far as bringing everybody together from a team perspective, and to some extent from a player perspective, I understand why you would want to have a longer ramp up period. And we discussed this all the time back in Miami. Have a longer ramp up period and give them 4 months, if that's what they want, of time off, February, March, April, May. Give them 4 months off and let them go to their private facilities and go train. Because from a coaching perspective, you're going to get, it's like you're starting training camp mentally, 4 to 6 weeks earlier. So you're going to get that many more reps in that actually matter. They're not going to forget all that information. So I think that makes a ton of sense from a team perspective. And that is where I think the NFLPA understands, well, the players aren't going to mind this because you're probably reducing the actual time in the building. Like if they start mid-June, early July, then it's only really another, what are we talking, 3-4 weeks, really? Versus like 8 to 12 that they're doing right now. And the team is going to probably say, you know what? I'd rather have that 4 weeks pre-training camp to make sure we're good on all our schemes. Especially think about the Packers right now installing new defense. Is it easier for Hafley to go in and install for 4 or 5 weeks, 3 to 4 to 5 weeks, right before training camp starts, and then hit the ground running? Or is it smarter to install right now, stop June 17th, take a month and a half off where he doesn't see anybody, and then have to reinstall that all over again? Like, it's simple math, right? So if the NFL is smart, they'll use that as this is what you guys actually want from a coaching perspective. And then two, if they're smart, putting this in place, this idea could have long-term benefits when it comes to lengthening the season. Because if you get January until June off, February till June off, 2 months after they do now, they come back for preseason work in June, 1 week off for the 4th of July, 2 more weeks they roll into training camp. And we know training camp shortened than years past. This puts the real, the season, how long am I at the building? I'm in the building from June until February, if things go well. International soccer, for example, is like a 10-month season, okay? I know the wear and tear is certainly different in football than it is in soccer. It would be difficult to ask a football player to spend more than 8 months playing in a row playing football. So in other words, I think the NFLPA could also be looking at this and saying, we'll come in for a month and a half of ramp up, but then there's no way we're extending, because I'm not going to start in June and then you're going to ask me to finish later in February. Every week now is just another week that we're in the building, banging our heads against one another, all of that. And you're like, well, Mike, they're already doing this time. Yeah, but it's not consecutive. They don't get a break. And that's always been the argument from players, I think, before now, is we need that break to recharge our batteries. And I think you'd use that 4th of July week to do that. We need that break to recharge our batteries so we can go in and give this our all. But I think what they're figuring out is players understand that some of the best training they're going to get is outside of the organization. They're going to go to their private facilities, they're going to go back to their colleges. They're going to get a little bit more personalized training. They're going to go work with other guys in the league, work on their very, very specific technical skill, learning how to watch all the tape, learning how to read different defenders, all that stuff that you learn when you're with your peer group. They're going to go continue to go do that, and they're going to spend more time doing that. They're going to have they're going to have kind of a better schedule to do that, because they don't have to, they do that for February through June, and then they go, okay, now we're done for this off. Now the season starts really in June. Let's go do this ramp up period. Yeah, we're not going full speed, but we're going to be in the classroom every day. We're going to be training. We're going to do all this stuff. So I think that would help on so many levels, the NFLPA. I think it would help players on so many levels. It's a little bit daunting to think about getting rid of that summertime and adding kind of a 6-week or 5 to 6 week profile of training with the team right before. But you see the benefits from a mental standpoint of not having to reinstall that scheme twice. So I'll be interesting to kind of interesting to see how that plays out. The other kind of thing that's going on in Green Bay, potentially, the talking point is that Jordan Love is up for a contract. He's set to make around, I think, $11 million this season, going into his 5th year. The rumors that he could be extended for Trevor Lawrence. What is he going to get? Joe Burrow money. Somewhere between potentially $50 to $55 million annually. And I know it's fun to peg his salary to someone else. Maybe he's Joe Burrow money. Maybe he's Deshaun Watson money. Maybe we wait and see what Trevor gets. And maybe Trevor, are they similar? What's the record there? How does that play out? What should the contract look like if you're trying to win over the long term for Green Bay? But here's the truth. And, everybody, after the ESPN flashes and, if Schefter reports it, it doesn't really matter. There's not a contract they're going to come up with that it would hamstring the Green Bay Packers forever. There's not a contract that they come up with that is not going to be insignificant. And really, in 2 to 3 years, the money's going to be irrelevant compared to the market, right? Except that he's, for the rest of us, he's making an absolute dump truck full of money, right? That he's earned through his play. For those who point to Trevor Lawrence, they point to Joe Burrow's contract that's current. Who cares? Because, I'll give you just my personal example. For 2 weeks, I was the highest paid guard in the National Football League. And then Brian Waters he was a Kansas City Chief All-Pro. He went to the contract guy in Kansas City. He's like, you just handed him my contract, said, I want this contract. Okay. That was it. It's over like that, right? And the next year, Steve Hutchinson, who's a Hall of Famer, went back and just blew the doors off everybody's contract and started earning like what we back then called Larry Allen money, because Larry Allen was basically being paid tackle money. So all of that stuff happens. Like Penei Sewell just blew the doors off as a right tackle, blew the doors off the tackle market by $3 million less than 2 years after Tunzel signed for $25 million. Sewell signs for 28 annually. So you just start like the money is it's funny money now, and maybe it's fun to talk about, but like as it really pertains to the cap and the team over the long term, it doesn't really matter. I mean, the money's going up almost parabolically right now, especially for prime positions like quarterback, left tackle, etc. The only question you have to answer is if you're a GM is this good? Is this guy good enough to win us games, or do we have to win games despite having this guy? Is he good enough to win us an extra? Can we look at the schedule and go, our quarterback is good enough to win us this game? He's going to have to win us these 2 games. If you have a guy you think will win you a couple games every year, you're in the minority. Like how many quarterbacks right now? How many quarterbacks could you count on for maybe 2 wins above average next season? 15th ranked top guy. So in other words, if you said, I have this guy, and I'm gonna pull whoever I think is the top 15, 16 ranked quarterback in the league, who's kind of a good player, not great player. How many guys are going to give you 2 wins over him? Same team, same situation. Here we go. I got Jackson, Mahomes, Burrow, CJ Stroud. I got Jared Goff. I got Josh Allen. I go maybe Dak. I got maybe Trevor Lawrence. I got I got Brock Purdy. Maybe. I have maybe, are we saying Justin Herbert talent-wise, but hasn't added up yet? Carr, maybe. So Jordan Love is in that conversation. But we're not talking about a lot of guys. So if he's in that conversation, then the answer is yes. Whether he makes like Mahomes' contract or Burrow's contract, doesn't really matter. Remember when Mahomes signed his $500 million deal? Like no one's asking for that contract right now because the money's gone up. It didn't take very long. And when he signed that thing, everyone's like, oh my God. And then you look at it and you go, it's going to be cap friendly in 3 years. And it is comparative to the market because the money's going up parabolically. So it changes so fast. It's like, don't worry about. It's fun to peg it. I mean, for some people, it's fun to peg it, but the reality is 2 years, it's not going to matter anyways. Just be happy you got a guy that can win. If you got a guy that can win you 2 games over average, that's it. That's the only conversation that you need to have. All right. With that said, I popped out for some listener questions. Guys, thanks for responding. So I had the question, what is the biggest question mark going into training camp? Read some of these out and then, hey, give me my thoughts. One answer, defensive scheme. How difficult is it to install a new defensive scheme given the limited reps at limited reps? I can't even talk at OTAs. Good question. Okay. This is, for me, this is where film and then experience and having mentors matters the most. Can you learn without taking reps? Absolutely. Like how much better can you get if you have film to watching it with somebody who understands what you're trying to accomplish? And that's usually a player who plays your position or it could be a player coach. It could be a coordinator, but like you don't have to be there. You don't have to be in that situation. There are plenty of guys that understand how to run cover 3. There's plenty of guys who understand how to fill a B gap. Now, if you're talking about nuanced details, if you want to talk about how do you scout your opponent, if you want to talk about the technique you want to use, you're going to have to learn, like from a technical standpoint, what the expectations are for you, and you can rep that on your own. But really, you can never watch enough tape. I mean, I guess that's the best way to put it. It's like no matter, even if you're at this elongated period of OTAs, or they extended it so you could watch another hour of film a day, like you really can't watch enough. Like you just can't watch enough film, because when you start really watching film, you'll just, particularly depending on the position you're in, you're going to start looking at different things. I might look at the guy across from me. Then I might look at the next level. What is the, for me, like, what does the linebacker depth or split tell me about who's coming down from the safety position, what my guy might be doing, what kind of defense they're run. I can know what set they're in, but does that tip off that they're running a specific stunt that we've seen? Right. And then you move back. Okay, they're rolling coverage here. Where does that mean the pressure's coming from? All of that, you just start moving back and seeing layers and layers and layers. And it's probably even more so, think defensively, you're at the safety position or the corner position where you're off the ball, you're looking at the quarterback, you got eyes on. I think the more tape you watch and understand how quarterbacks try to bait you, what their pump fakes look like, what their footwear looks like when they're running, certain routes, all of that stuff, it starts to build out. I mean, you started by watching the receivers, you started by watching the splits, you started by watching the formations in the splits, the releases, their breaks, any tip tells and tendencies they have. Then you probably get to the quarterback, right? And then you start thinking about, okay, what does his footwork on this look? Does he ever throw a hitch fade on a 3-step when he looks to his right? Does he always fake to his left? Does he pump fake it with two hands? All that stuff, like, you start picking it up, and you have a catalog of different quarterbacks you've been working against in different teams. So I guess the short answer is you can definitely do it, but you're always going to have to put in extra time. Question: with the new strength conditioning staff, will they change anything, or is staying healthy more hope than anything else? Like, in other words, is there any magic potion that these guys can do that haven't been done before? Well, I'll say this. The last staff, and I've talked about this, that, like, they're as good as it is as there is in the league as far as trying to improve the development of players while maximizing recovery and maintaining health. About 10 years ago, I think, when they started bringing in sports science guys, performance guys, there was this huge, like, cash thrown at these guys, but they were giving information to the teams that the coaches didn't really value, because some of the information contextually wasn't valuable. And then some of the information ran counter to what they wanted to accomplish. Like, if I'm trying to make you a tougher player, I got to put you under difficult situations. Well, for a while, when the guys were like, oh, he's running hot, I think the coach is going, well, good. That's like crucible time. Like, how do you get better? Or the quarterback needs to get 40 reps. If the left guard is wanting to be on the first team, he's getting 40 reps too. I don't care how tired he is. So because of all of these different things, and that is not the fault of anyone except for probably the management who brought everybody in too early and started throwing too much money at these guys, that platform became a vehicle to really help players maximize recovery. And so all these different recovery modalities and understanding, okay, you've done this today, how are we going to get you back ready for tomorrow? That probably became of primary importance. And I think that's partly the strength and conditioning staff, but that's really the whole performance staff in general now, and how they work together. We're talking about nutrition, recovery, strength, everything, the AT, the PT. So sleep. So are these guys, like Christian Watson, for example? I just read somewhere he went and got tested, like University of Wisconsin or something, and they were like, oh yeah, his hamstrings are imbalanced, and so they're going to work on that. I'm like, guys, I know that's a great news, and maybe Christian Watson wasn't aware, or maybe like it's new news. He's excited about, like, the opportunity to be healthy, so he's talking about that. But I know the guys that were there before. I would be beyond shocked if they weren't aware that he had a hamstring imbalance and they weren't working on it. I would be, I'd go out and give my car to the guy down the street. Like, that doesn't make it. There's absolutely no way that's true. Okay, so a lot of this stuff is just repackaged, repurposed. There's fresh enthusiasm, and certainly when you send somebody to a specialist and they get information, sometimes you get excited about the product. Christian Watson, look, man, you're potentially a great player, but you want to be healthy. So of course you're going to be excited about any information that leads to, like, oh, this is how I'm going to get healthy. So I'm just basically saying, I'm sure these guys are doing stuff that's very similar to what the last group did. I think the biggest change is probably how the personality of the new staff probably fits how Matt LaFleur thinks about himself, thinks about his identity as it comes to like his team in the weight room. All of that maybe changes a little bit because that's probably the biggest, like, personality is probably the biggest factor in who you're going to hire in that situation. Over under, Isaiah McDuffie starts 10.5 games. I think Cooper's probably going to be handed the job. Injuries, who knows, but 17 games, 10.5 would be a lot of starts for him. I hope he starts 14, 15. Similar question. What's the plan with linebacker with two players playing with very similar abilities? I assume you're talking about Quay and Cooper. Quay's a bigger. I think Quay outweighs him by like 10, 14 pounds. Cooper's much more, in my opinion, off the film. Again, pro's different. Cooper looks like a very instinctive player. I think he naturally gets downhill better than Quay. McDuffie is kind of a more compact guy. He plays with better leverage, but he's 227. Cooper's 230. Quay's 240. Or 230 or whatever, 238. None of these guys are what you would call Isaiah's the closest thing you have to a thumper. Okay, the other two guys aren't thumpers. So getting off the block is really when you start looking at like, how's this going to work? You watch BC tape. You watch what Cooper's good at. You watch what Tyron Hopper's good at. They want to play down. They want to play downhill, but they're not big enough, and they're not good enough technically for block destruction yet. That's going to be kind of the thing. Can we force running backs to go laterally so they can run away from the lineman? Because if they run downhill, I think they're going to have a hard time. Like if you run inside zone, mid zone, where these guys have to have a real confrontation, I think more often than not, like we don't like that situation. So you're going to have to be really good in the middle, Kenny Clark and company, Wyatt and company, at clogging up those gaps and forcing running backs to bounce and forcing them to go laterally, because then it allows your linebackers to chase down and use speed. Now, I think if you have McDuffie in there instinctively, he just does a better job of filling gaps early. Now, again, when you get linebackers staggered sometimes and one of them's ahead of the other, it's just like a line out in rugby. When you got different lines, sometimes there's gaps in that as well. So you have to have those players playing in the same mindset. And that's going to be a real challenge, I think, for the defensive staff. Something they can certainly do, but that's a coaching point I think they're going to be harping on throughout OTAs and training camp. For against the proposed move of OTAs, is there a group that benefits from the offseason work together, aside from maybe the quarterbacks and wide receivers? I would say this: everybody benefits from working together. But, it's like Tom Brady during COVID and before COVID, he would go out and he had his guys working together. And obviously Peyton Manning, and you heard about these old, I think Russell Wilson did this or does this. I think all the quarterbacks do this now, where they'll have, certainly there was something up in Minnesota for years, where guys are getting their players together in a place that they all want to be, and they go and they talk and they hang out. Maybe they rent a house and they work and they work and they work. And it's away from the facility. So what's that mean? Well, that means that there's nobody in the room except for them that's going to tell them how they want something run. So that it's just like a one-to-one communication. And sometimes that's good, especially if you've got like a veteran quarterback and some younger players. And sometimes, maybe in the case of the Green Bay Packers, maybe you want that wide receivers coach there more, because we have some fundamental problems with like route running because they're still young players. But if you've got kind of veteran guys or a veteran QB who can tell you exactly what he wants, then going off on your own, because now you're at the gym that you probably appreciate more than maybe you do being at the facility. You're keeping your own schedule. You're all of that stuff. If it's they're not worried about like, can they afford their meals and stuff. They're going to get a free meal from the Packers. Like, guys aren't worried about that. The people I'm referencing aren't worried about that, I should say. So there's some real benefit to that being away. So I think that 4 months, like I don't think that you're gonna sit here and watch the quarterbacks and wide receivers not see each other until the mid-June. Now, linemen, defensive line, Mike Flanagan and I lived near each other. We'd have guys come in and work defensive ends, different offensive linemen down at UNLV in that area in Vegas. But, we didn't have like a summit like they have now. They have like an O-line summit, but a lot of that is not focused on, hey, technically we're going to make you like the best player. It's like, how do you take care of yourself? There's a lot of kind of introduction stuff going on there as well. I've been told. So I think all of those things are good. The tight end, I think all those things are good. And you're going to see that more if you have a longer off season compared to that ramp up. Secondary and kicking, what number one concern? Secondary and kicking game for sure. Not only kicker, but the new rules and return game. Oh, so I think this. I'm really excited to see how Rich Bisaccia uses Keyshawn Nixon in the new kickoff return, but also I think Marshawn Lloyd. When I see Marshawn Lloyd and you start talking to like some special teams guys around the league about what are the options now with guys lined up on the 35 and the returners lined up on the 30, and then you got two guys in the back. And because it's a little bit, they couldn't do the XFL one, so it's a little bit different with the way they can drop two guys behind the 30. Like, you could see some sparks fly, especially if you get two returners back there, and they might be more like Nixon's going to be back there, period. But you start looking at that second guy, like Marshawn Lloyd, just from an explosive standpoint, Andy's 220, because all of that confrontation could happen, depending on how good these kickers are, like dropping the ball at the 19 and having it bounce, you got to pick it up. Like, a lot of this stuff is going to be maybe more how a running back sees the field than like a return guy. It could be all in one wave with one kick out block or one lead up, or, it could be a line of people that looks more like a zone read than, having players at all these different levels, because there's not, 35 yards to navigate through different blockers if you're the kickoff coverage team. So I'm super interested to see that. Here we go. Where the defense. So one of the questions is the new defense, is that going to force kind of a slow start on the defensive side? Is the offense going to have to make up for it? Are they going to lose a couple games early because of that? And then, how does that look over the course of the season? Well, here's the thing. It's a great question. What are the potential pitfalls and benefits of bringing a guy in from college? And remember, of course, that Hafley was also working as a secondaries coach for Rob Salah, I think, when he was in San Francisco. So one of the real positives for me is college football runs fast. So if you don't have a communication method that goes fast, like one word to describe a coverage, I don't think you last. So I think the verbiage and everything is going to be implemented quickly. And the hope there is that you get really, really good at a couple things early in the season. Like the hope for Hafley is like, can you install everything and be really good at everything on week one, day one? Probably not. But can you install 60 to 65, 70% of your playbook at a like elite level where they're communicating on the same page? Like, communication and being on the same page is, because that breeds confidence in not only yourself, but your team. That's one of the most important things you can come up with. So that's kind of the hope there for me is, can you install and run 60 to 65% of your stuff at a high level? And then as they start to scout you in, week 3, 4, 5, you can start learning how to disguise different looks and coverages. You can start getting a little bit better at, or maybe you can, get some new plays in there as far as like, these are looks that I'm not going to show, or, I was running a Mike Sam here and now I'm going to run a Sam Strong safety, but I'm going to show the same look, or I'm maybe going to bring it off the weak side instead of the strong. So there's a couple of different things that we can do. And, from a defensive or offensive standpoint, there's kind of two schools of thought. Can I show one structure where I can do like 10 different things out of, so they don't never ever know what I'm going to use? Or should I show 10 different structures that I do one thing out of, so they have to remember why I would be in that formation, alignment, etc. So if they could see it, they'll be like, oh, they're running this. if a defense lines up in a base 4-3 and all of a sudden the will cheats out and they always do one thing, that's easy to see, right? If he stays in the same spot and does 10 different things, that's hard for me to pick up. If they run a base 4-3, but they also run out of their base package, they run 27 different looks, and I got to remember every one of them. That's hard to pick up as well. So what's easier to learn? Well, probably the easiest thing to learn is let's start in less and teach ourselves to do more with less without tipping. And then, so, we'll kind of have to see how that works, but that's, the pitfalls are sometimes, obviously the complexity of a pro offense is greater than most things you're going to see in college. So again, I think that benefits to, have less installed and just be better at watching tape. So again, having a better understanding of what you're going to see, what the keys are from a defensive perspective, looking at the offensive line, the backfield, the receiver splits, etc., being really, really good at that and teaching that and taking pride in that, and then being the best at the basis of, block destruction and tackling, maybe more so than how much stuff can I put in a week one. And, I just get the feeling that Half is going to be really good at that. It seems like from his interviews, that's what he really values. Got a couple of others here. How can the new aggressive style pass rush attacking defense stop the run without over pursuing? Well, when you're playing attacking defenses, it's not like guys are just, you hear this thing like make the tackle on the way to the quarterback. You still got to make the tackle. You still have to be, there's an awareness factor. And Old Man Washburn used to teach, it was Chris Kurasik's head D-line coach when they were in Detroit. They were teaching Ndamukong Suh. So Suh would show us back in the day, you put your hand in the ground and your first step, your foot's got to replace your hand. And then depending on which way your toes pointed is based on what your first read is. So think about how fast that has to happen. So with good defensive line coaches, they are teaching some very, very subtle movements, toe position to combat what they're seeing off the initial movement of the guard and the tackle, for example, the 3 technique. So when you start talking about this stuff, it sometimes seems like, maybe because some guys probably are just firing off the ball and they're running a trap right past them. And that's going to happen with a really well-executed scheme at times. But with a lot of this stuff, you have to remember it's so much about details. And these guys are really, really high-level coaching and high-level playing that a good, well-coached group isn't going to just, pin their ears back and give up the draw and give up the trap and give up the insides. They're going to have a very, very good understanding that we can play aggressive. We're just trying to reset the line of scrimmage every time. Again, what we just talked about, make that running back go horizontal so the linebackers can get off those blocks and make tackles. Can the offensive line and quarterback continue the success they were having last half of the year, last season? If yes, I think I should relax. Okay, well, I think so. I mean, obviously, losing Bakhtiari permanently is a big deal. Not understanding who you're going to have at least 2 of the positions, I think is a big deal. I don't know what we've seen in OTAs, but Zach Tom's going to play, Jenkins going to play. Myers just for right now probably looks like he's going to be the center. So is the first round draft pick? Where's he going to play? Jordan is Walker going to be the starting left tackle or not? Are we going to give Sean Ryan the not? You basically have right now, without knowing the other guys, you have 6 players for 5 positions. Who's going to play out? Luckily, you could start 5 that you saw last year and had success with. Sean Ryan not being a starter, but you could start 5 guys who you saw last year and had success with. I would imagine the quarterback, he's not in year 2, guys. He's in year 5 now, I think. So this isn't going to be one of those deals where he has a sophomore slump, right? And now his receivers are going to have a year under their belt of understanding, communicating how they want routes run. Are they seeing the same thing Jordan's seeing? And they were good last year. So, I think that competition, and who's going to be the alpha in that room? Because last year we went into the room thinking okay, is it Dotson or Dobbs or Watson? And it wasn't. It's a no. It's so many of those other guys in different moments. And so who's going to fight to be that go-to? Or who are the 2 guys that you're going to line up and say, I got to throw to these guys every time? Is that even a thing? Is it going to be receptions by committee? Like, there's so many questions to answer in that room because they're so good. And I think that's exciting, but it's also it's going to propel those guys. There's going to be 4 guys that get remarkably better because otherwise they're not competing. O-line depth. Oh, here you go. What are realistic expectations for Lucas Van Ness in his second season, assuming he's relatively healthy? So this one's tough for me because even when he was drafted, you watch his college tape and you go, okay, there's some athleticism there, certainly. There's a motor there. He's an Iowa product. I like all of that. But as far as what about him physically or from a technique or movement standpoint does he put fear into my heart as a person who has to block him from a pass rush standpoint or a run game standpoint? And I don't have a great answer. And so I think he's going to have to take a really big jump as far as he does a good job with attacking inside hand and stabbing. Now, how fast can I work off that? How fluid am I flipping my hips so I can maybe have some more moves that help me win closer to the hip and armpit of the tackle? Being in a 3-point stance is, if they allow him to be, is going to be better for him than being in a 2-point. We saw that in college. It's absolutely true. Better get off, better leverage, better power. So I think that is going to be a big deal. Having said that, he's not a starting caliber player on this defense, and so he's a rotational guy. So again, not his fault, but you did bring a first-round high draft pick. You brought in a guy that's not going to be a starter in year 2. That's, barring injury to somebody else, I think that's difficult. Have we seen the best of Josh Myers? And if so, is he the starting center for Green Bay all next year? What a great question. What a great question. I think the short answer is I don't think we've seen the best of him. I think that he dipped when they got a new line coach. He was better last year. I think he's going to keep, you have to know these guys, and I don't know him. I mean, you have to sit down and go, like, I want to know what kind of guy you are. Are you the kind of guy who's just like, man, I want to be all pro and I'm going to do everything to be all pro? Or am I a guy who's like, I'm an Ohio State kid. I've had a good career so far. There's been some ups and downs, but I'm managing. Like the perspective is different. It could be this, you say the first thing, and it's like, okay, I want to invest in this guy. You say the second thing, and it's like, I've heard this story before. I just don't know who he is. I've never sat down and had that conversation with him. But if he's a guy that's desperate, I want to be an all pro. I want to be considered the top at my position. I'm willing to put the work in, not just lip service. Then yeah, I think I still think there's a really high ceiling on him. And honestly, quite frankly, we saw it. I did some film on him maybe a month ago, but he does have some good things. It's just his limitation is still with his initial footwork, and he hasn't fixed it in 3 years. Last one. I think it really comes down to whether so many 2023 surprises can continue success in 2024. Kind of a lot of young talent to avoid a sophomore slump. It's true. We just talked about that with the wide receivers. I don't think you have an issue there. I think you're injecting some new blood into the defense. I think you're going to get a starter at linebacker. You're going to get 2 new starters at safety. Stokes is coming off an injury. Wyatt's going to be into his 3rd year now, so you expect a big jump in production from him. Comes in shape, comes in maybe ready to play with great leverage from snap number 1. And you really got something there. I think Kenny's still in his prime. Certainly, Rashawn Gary is looking to, I would imagine, have a big year after coming off the injury last year and being, productive, but maybe, I'm sure he left some meat on the bone that he wants to get back. Preston continuing to be kind of a very, very reliable player. And then you have your Lucas Van Ness, you have your Edibari, you have these guys that are, potentially going to have, I always look at, quite frankly, you look at the defensive line position, you look at Carl Brooks, and you think, well, he was pretty good last year. what's an offseason going to do for a guy like that? Is he potentially an 8 to 10 sack guy in nickel situations? It's not out of the realm of possibility. The way he played last year, he's got a nose for the football. So really excited about, I think, a lot of these things. And there's so much to be, this is the fun part about the offseason. There's so much to be answered. And certainly these guys are taking a hard look at it right now. I really am interested to see how that NFLPA thing is addressed. I do think there's a benefit for both sides. I do think that the coaches will initially go, I want to work with them more. But when they look at it just from a preparation standpoint, being so far into the playbook by day one of training camp just seems fantastic because, I think I said this, if I didn't say this before, mini camps, you're installing. Day one of training camp, you're reinstalling. Now, it might be faster, but you're still wasting time as opposed to just diving right in. So think about how much more productive you are from a film session standpoint if you don't have to do that for the first week of practice. Just right there, it seems like it's worth the time. All right. Guys, first time we've never done no film, and I'm like super uncomfortable with it, and I know everyone's going to hate me for it because I think a lot of people watch this because of the film. But I can either pull up some old tape and go down memory lane. I can pull up some other guys. If you have ideas, if you want me to break down something, let me know. It's just right now, it seems like I don't know. It just seems like watching tape right now is outside of the OT. I can't get excited about like watching guys in pillow pads. Just can't do it. All right. Find me Mike Wahle 68. Hey, thanks to Bet Online, of course, our sponsor. Find us on the Believe Network. Mike Wahle 68 on X. Process to Perform channel on YouTube. Have a great weekend.